Introducing the Italian Grape Geek program, a new and original approach to Italian wines. IGG, as it's fondly known, is a book, a podcast, an online theory course, and an in-person tasting course. Our pocket-sized book briefly introduces 80 grapes with benchmark producers, helping you find and taste these great wines on your own. Space to make your own notes makes the book a personal record of your Italian wine journey. No time to read? We've read the whole book out loud with added insights from Italian wine ambassadors. Listen for free on Italian Wine Podcast. Obsessed with Italian wine? Take the super accessible online theory course. Get certified as an Italian grape geek. Want more? Our international IGG educators have got your in-person tasting course to cap off your full IGG immersion. Go to mamajumboshrimp.com and sign up today.
Obviously, we're aware of social media now and TikTok and Instagram and video content. But what role does old-fashioned writing have when it comes to selling or marketing fine wine?
It's a really interesting question. I think it's incredibly important. I might be biased because I'm someone who is to do that for part of my living. But it's a broader definition of writing than perhaps might meet the eye. It's everything from the way you can kind of bring a brand to life through the service copy you might get on a website, the navigation menus, the little bits of copy that help you guide you through a sort of purchasing journey or give you the background on what you're doing, that introduce you to a business, through to an annual Burgundy report on the latest vintage.
Hello and welcome to Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Hough, and I'm delighted that you're joining us as we get between the vines with some of the best wine writing out there. So sit back, pour yourself a glass, and enjoy the show with the Italian Wine Podcast.
This month, our guest is the English wine writer Sophie Thorpe. Amongst other things, Sophie is the book reviewer for Decanter magazine. And since this is our last show before Christmas, Sophie has agreed to share with us some of her favourite books from 2025. So if you haven't done your Christmas shopping yet, there's still time to pick up the perfect gift for the wine lover in your life. Hi Sophie, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
It's a real pleasure. Tell me, Sophie, when did your interest in wine begin?
So I fell into wine at university. I joined the Wine Society at university for cheap drinks, ultimately, and to make some friends from outside, meet some different people. And then I found out that if you joined the committee, you could go for free. So the drinks got even cheaper. So I did that. And then before you knew it, I was therefore going every week and started tasting some very nice wines, some very interesting wines, and got reeled in. And I sort of decided I needed to somehow sustain the habit. And it was a choice between joining the industry or doing something that would pay me enough to keep drinking so well, and doing something a lot more dull. So I opted for joining the industry. And
what did those wine tastings, I presume they were at university, is that what you were involved in? Was it a tasting club?
Yeah, it was a university wine society, yeah. And I was really lucky. They did some great tastings. I think the president was really good while I was there. And there were a couple of really special dinners with Bordeaux Chateau that were game changing for me. One with Chateau Margaux, and there was one just after I left that was with Haut-Brion, and tasting 89 Haut-Brion was a life-changing moment for me.
Wow.
One that I've amazingly managed to repeat once, but I suspect never again.
Yeah. And was the focus there always really on fine wines, or were there more accessible wine regions and wine?
No, it was a real mix. They leaned towards fine wine when they could, but it was. I remember tasting with Cambridge wine merchants would come in every year and do a tasting, and that was a real mix of things. I remember it was my first introduction to white port and tonic. It was all sorts of things that we came across. So it was quite a broad introduction.
Okay. And were there qualifications at this point and writing, or was it really just a case of enjoying what was in front of you?
No, it was absolutely no qualifications. When I joined, I didn't even drink red wine. That sort of gradually, as I learned more, right. I started engaging with that. But I came from very much ground zero. Wine was sort of drunk at home, but no one really knew that much about it, other than that it was quite nice with a meal and sort of consumed, I suppose, in quite a Mediterranean way, which was maybe relatively unusual at that time. But then, yes, when I got my first job, I sort of started on a WSET course, started sort of in a small wine shop bar that was a startup selling only English wine. And then I ended up doing an internship at Berry Brothers and Rudd and fell into writing really while I was there. I'd written a bit throughout, but never really kind of considered it as a career option. I considered publishing very briefly while I was at university. But yeah, it sort of all fell into place, and I can't imagine doing anything else now, really.
And you mentioned there Berry Brothers and Rudd. Can you just tell us, for our listeners who perhaps aren't aware of what they do, it's one of Britain's oldest fine wine merchants. Can you just tell us a bit about your role there and maybe a bit about the history of that fine wine merchant?
Yeah, of course. They are Britain's oldest wine and spirits merchant, date back to 1698. So I worked for them for about 7 years. They sell everything from more modest wines, not quite entry level, but sort of £10 a bottle up to the very, very top wine in the world.
Famously the Queen's wine supplier.
Yes, they are one of the royal warrant holders.
Okay.
Yeah, a really fantastic business that I was lucky to work in for a long time. So I worked mostly after sort of starting as an intern in the marketing side, writing marketing copy, and then also writing for their blog and magazine that they used to have back then.
Very interesting. And also you then moved on to Fine and Rare, one of the world's biggest fine wine merchants. What I'm really interested in is the role of a wine writer within an organisation like Fine and Rare or Berry Brothers, because obviously we're aware of social media now and TikTok and Instagram and video content. But what role does old-fashioned writing have when it comes to selling or marketing fine wine?
It's a really interesting question. I think it's incredibly important. I might be biased because I'm someone who is to do that for part of my living. But I think it's a broader definition of writing than perhaps might meet the eye. It's everything from the way you can kind of bring a brand to life through the service copy you might get on a website, the navigation menus, the little bits of copy that help you guide you through a sort of purchasing journey, or give you the background on what you're doing, that introduce you to a business, through to an annual Burgundy report on the latest vintage. So I think that writing in general can be very widespread in its role, and I think it's integral. I think it's incredibly hard sometimes to justify from a financial perspective it's very hard to measure the value of that. And particularly when you're looking at something like more editorial content, ultimately it's about engagement and retention of clients rather than converting directly into sales in that moment. And it's about brand building and increasing authority or reinforcing authority of a business and its expertise. Which is hard to pinpoint on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, but I was really impressed by the body of work the volume of articles and the content of those articles. When you go onto the Fine and Rare website, there's a whole lot of articles about different wine regions that are really a pleasure to read, and it's not necessarily, or wouldn't necessarily be the obvious choice of place to go when you're looking to read about a particular wine region. So yeah, there's a really impressive body of work there. Whether that would then translate into sales, as you say, it's difficult to quantify. But I mean, I know from personal experience, as someone who spends most of my day either reading or writing about wine in one form or another, that it's really thirsty work. So I can imagine people reading an article and then clicking through and spending, a couple of £100 on 3 bottles of 2022 Solaya or something like that.
Yeah.
Continuing on the topic of this fine wine, which is an area obviously where you have experience and expertise, France is obviously a leading player, and that comes through when you look at the content and the wine on offer from fine wine suppliers. But where does Italy sit in that mix? Are we really only speaking about Tuscany and Piemonte, or are there other regions in play when we think of the international fine wine market?
Yeah, I think it depends how you're defining fine wine. If you are looking at collectors, then Tuscany and Piedmont are still definitely the leaders. But I do think that there's growing interest. I think somewhere like Etna is building in a really exciting way, and there's a lot of engagement with that sort of Burgundy style, single site, very elegant style of wine that resonates, I think, with consumers. But you've also got, sort of the iconic names that stand alone, sort of beyond the region in many ways, people like Miani and Quintarelli and Valentini building elsewhere, but there aren't other regions that are quite competing in the same way.
Yeah.
Certainly when it comes to filling spots in the cellar. But hopefully that will evolve in time.
Yes. And I mean, I've been writing and reading this morning about the UNESCO recognition for Italian food. And presumably that will also have some knock-on implications for Italian wine.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what that impact is.
Okay, speaking more about your personal interest rather than your professional interest, your writing has appeared on Jancis Robinson. You've got your monthly column in Decanter, and you also have First Press UK, which is your online portfolio of writing. So what kind of wine stories are of personal interest to you? Is there an overlap between your professional, if you like, and your personal?
Yeah, I'd say I've been lucky in much of my professional career as well that I've had reasonable amount of free rein to while you are working within a portfolio of the regions and producers that someone works with, you're also looking for the interesting stories within that. So it's I've been very lucky in that regard. But I think ultimately what it comes down to for me is that it's about people. I think that's what makes almost anything very interesting. All my favourite features hinge on a character that I found interesting. Not always someone I've liked necessarily, but someone who's passionate about what they do. They've got opinions. They're intriguing for whatever reason that might be. Those are the people who I think are a journalist's dream. Whether you like them or not, it doesn't matter. They're always interesting to write about, and it's particularly fun if you happen to like the wines they make. That always makes it, I think, even more interesting. But I also think it's sort of looking at things that are maybe tangential to the world of wine. I think some of the favourite things I've done, I did a piece where I spoke to one of the team that looks after the horses at Ponte Cane, for example, and I spoke to the cooper at who works at Smith Lafitte, and they're really interesting, looking at a craft that, you know, it overlaps with the world of wine, isn't exclusive to the world of wine, but is integral to what those two producers do.
Yes, absolutely. And those articles, I presume, we can find on your website.
Yeah, you absolutely can.
Okay, good. We'll put links to that on the show notes for the episode. Another endeavour that you're currently involved in, Sophie, is the Master of Wine program. Can you tell us a bit about that? What stage are you at in that process, and how are you finding it?
Yeah, it's well, I think anyone who has ever embarked upon or is on the Master of Wine journey, it is a journey, and that's for sure. Yeah. I'm at the final stage now, so I've got the exams out the way, and I'm tackling the research paper, although I've not made as much progress on that as I'd have liked, but I'm sort of finalising a topic at the moment, so looking at that. It's an amazing qualification to take on. You know, it gives you such an amazing context to whatever area of the industry you're working in. You know, I've worked very much in fine wine for most of my career, and being able to sort of take a step back and know about the world of bulk shipping and, you know, wines that are made in entirely different volumes and in an entirely different approach, but are still really fascinating, is, incredible.
Congratulations, first of all, for reaching that stage. I know for people I've spoke to, not from personal experience, but for people I've spoke to, just how rigorous that exam process is, and the tasting process as well. And the other thing that always strikes me is the sense of community, and the sense of it's almost like it can be a collegiate process as well, when you're working together with other masters of wine, and then the access that gives you also to wine producers in various regions. How are you finding that aspect of the process?
Yeah, I think I've met an incredible range of people. Definitely, like, you know, like going to a conference or whatever you do. You know, you build a network and a really global network of other students, and, you know, you meet existing MWs as well who come in for seminars or similar events. But it is, I think, I've got incredibly close friends from the program who I've, you know, studied with. It's ultimately a self-study program, so it's actually in many ways a very lonely process. So you need to find people to depend upon, and learn with. And I was lucky; I had a really great mentor as well. More than anything, perhaps the context that you get from studying also informs wine visits in a different way, and talking to producers, and really enriches those conversations, I think, because you've got that greater context for them.
Final question before we come on to your top 5 wine books of 2025. And this is the Italian Wine Podcast. You've already mentioned Etna, and we've discussed, obviously, Tuscany and Piemonte. But I just want to get a sense from you about what your personal relationship is with Italy and Italian wine. Are there any other regions or styles or producers that are particularly interesting to you at the moment?
Yeah, so I think like almost anyone who isn't embedded in Italian wine, it remains daunting. There's such an endless supply of indigenous grapes, amazing regions, incredible array of styles, but it's exactly what makes it so exciting and interesting. I was in a wine bar not that long ago and had my first taste of Nescetta. I was at a tasting not that long ago and had a Timorasso, which every time I taste Timorasso, I think, God, I need to drink more and taste more and learn more about Timorasso.
Yeah.
You know, I have not travelled enough in Italy, particularly when it comes to wine. I've spent some time in Tuscany and Piedmont, as you might guess, given my background. But I would love, I'd really love to go to Etna. I think that there are also some really exciting white wines. Like I love the Pinot Gris from Lisneris. I think there's so much that I need to dive into, and I need to find more time and to go and learn more and taste more, and it's never ending.
Absolutely. I mean, the complexity and the depth and breadth is one, as you say, one of the attractions of Italian wine, but it is also difficult to know sometimes where to start. When I go into a supermarket here, for example, or even at Vinitaly, it can be incredibly daunting, just the absolute vast array of choice at your disposal.
And that's what it feels like for two professionals. I can't imagine what it feels like for a consumer who doesn't have the same sort of level of knowledge that we do. So it's a challenge for the country, I think, in some ways, but a fun one.
Yeah. Okay. What about trends in wine writing? Before you give us your top 5 or favorite 5 wine books from 2025, have you seen any trends? Because you're obviously extremely well read when it comes to wine. You write these book reviews for Decanter. Is there any kind of emerging trends or anything that ties together some of the books that you've been reading this year?
I looked at this and was trying to think about it. I think
it's not an easy question.
Broadly, the books that I receive seem to fall into. There are 2 major groups, I think. You get the sort of introductory style books, and it feels like there are an awful lot of them, all succeeding to various degrees, trying to sort of launch wine to people and
Yeah, I mean, saying more or less the same thing, but in a slightly different way.
Yeah, and trying to do it differently sometimes. I think there was one. It isn't in my top 5 because it was technically published last year, but The Rebel School of Wine. It was a really interesting one because I think it did achieve doing it differently. Lots of them are trying to do something different and, generally sort of quite close reiterations, I find. But then outside of that, there are a lot of, obviously, region guides. Feels like the Classic Wine Library has been doing a lot this year, for example. So lots of new books tackling the wines of Brazil, the wines of Beaujolais, etc. But I think maybe I've seen more science-led books landing on my desk. Things, I mean, it'll come up in the books I've chosen, but certainly trying to, I think, strip away the mystique that some people associate with wine, which is, I think, a really great thing to do. It can mean that they're a little bit tough to read, depending on who they're written by. But I think it's an interesting way to take on the world of wine.
Yeah, that's really interesting observations, and I think you've nailed it really with those kind of 2 broad areas. I've had a few of the kind of scientific approach writers on the show here as well, so I can certainly recognise that one. The Rebel School of Wine by Tyler Ballet, I think, is the one that you referring to. Published in 2024 by HarperCollins. Okay, and so we're going to consider these 5 wine books of 2025. They're in no particular order, and these are your 5 of your favourite books. I know that there are so many, and you are, as I previously mentioned, extremely well read. So it's not an easy task choosing these 5, but you've done that for us. So let's take your first book, Sophie.
Yeah. So the first one is quite a recent release. It is Book on Saint-Julien by Marc Bouffard, Vineyards, Cellars, People and Place. And it's the first in a series that will be touring through the different appellations of Bordeaux. I think it's interesting because Bordeaux can be a very impersonal wine region, I think. it's got that very luxury, prestigious reputation. And certainly as someone who spent quite a lot of time there, it can be hard to sort of scrape behind the facade of the region. And I think Marc Bouffard, and the way he describes it himself, is as trying to put on paper the concept of going and visiting each of the properties that he profiles within. He does it by taking on each of the cru classé in the appellation. And doing, he talks about it being the long visit. So really exploring every corner of a property and getting the detail. But he also does it in a very personal way. He confesses that it's not unbiased. He's, spends time socially with some of these people. But I don't think that's to its detriment. And I think it brings something different to the sort of body of work on Bordeaux. There are some fantastic books out there already, Inside Bordeaux, obviously in terms of one of the most recent, Jane Anson's sort of tome that is a Bible for the region. But this is very different.
Yes, very interesting. I haven't read that book, but he's got a very interesting background as well as a wine writer. He's a neurologist at Harvard Medical School.
Yeah, exactly. He wasn't someone he's huge on Instagram, but wasn't someone I'd really come across or knew much about. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he's an assistant professor of neurology at Harvard, but is clearly a very, very serious wine guy on the side. And I think that non-wine background probably helps this book a lot.
Yeah.
Because although there's an amazing level of detail, it's written in a very accessible way.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be in the trade or a really serious wine nerd to enjoy reading it.
Okay. And that was published in October this year.
Yeah, October this year, by Académie du Vin Library, in association with the Wine Education Council Press.
Do you want to give us a short reading, Sophie, from that one? Just maybe a passage just to give us a sense of the writing.
Yeah, and it's one that I think shows the idea of the personality that comes through in the book. So it's on the section of on Longo and Leoville Barton. There are few people as dear to me as Lillian Barton Sartorius. Her role at Longo and Leoville Barton was not set from childhood in this way, but instead born of family tragedy. Lillian's brother, Thomas, perished in a car accident in 1990, shortly after she had returned to Bordeaux from Hong Kong to work with her father in the family negociant business. After this, Lillian assumed progressively greater responsibilities at the chateau. With amazingly good humour, the kindest smile and the sharpest wit, she has worked tirelessly to refine the wines of the family estates while respecting their classical character. I see her at work during en primeur tours, and her manner is so modest and self-deprecating that, if you didn't know better, you might not realise how deftly she has shepherded Leoville and Longo Barton into the modern era.
Okay, so that is Marc Bouffard, Vineyard, Cellar, People and Place. Your second book, Sophie?
The second one is The Wines of California by Elaine Chukan Brown. I partly chose this because I think when I wrote about it, I got an email from the publisher saying, "Oh, that was a bit harsh," and I think that's unfair to maybe how I'd felt about the book, because I think it's a really great. I think there's lots of really great stuff in this book, and I really love their writing. I think Brown's a fascinating writer with great talent. I didn't wholeheartedly love it because I'm not sure. I think it's trying to be two books. And I think it could have been two really great, really different books that would have been slightly better than trying to combine them into one. What makes it really interesting to me is the sort of broader context that they bring to the book. It's sort of got overarching 3 sections: how we got here, where we grow, and what we're facing. And that sort of look at California and the wine industry in a sort of broader, almost State of the Union type view is what really makes it quite unique. And in the middle of that, you've got a book that's trying to be a guide to the wines of California, which is all done very well. But maybe they'd be better if they were slightly separated, is my personal view. But I still think it deserves to be up there. And partly because it's done, the writing is just so good.
Yes, yeah. Very, very interesting. Again, it's not a book that I have read, but I am aware, obviously, of Elaine Brown's body of work. Elaine's been on the Italian Wine podcast as well as a guest of the show. Do you want to give us a reading as well from that book so we get a sense of Elaine's writing?
Yeah, of course. And so this is it's from very early on in the book, and it's on a section about the role of indigenous peoples. When the Spanish established the colony in what came to be known as Alta California, their law did not recognize indigenous people as citizens, but neither did it allow them freedom. Instead, the goal of the first settlements of Alta California was to civilize indigenous people into Spanish ways of life, first through conversion and then by enslavement. This attitude of the first colonizers laid the foundation for similar attitudes practiced by Mexico and then more extreme efforts to eradicate native peoples entirely by the United States. Indigenous peoples under Mexican rule were treated as indentured servants. When California joined the United States, the first legislature created a law that made forced labor of native peoples to non-natives legal and denied natives citizenship. Soon after, laws were added that paid for their extermination. Even so, into the 1860s, indigenous workers served as the primary means for planting and growing wine in California. Knowledge gained from work within the missions was carried into subsequent plantings for private landowners. The know-how indigenous peoples provided made the first 100 years of California wine possible, and under Mexico and the United States, helped build the region's economy.
Okay. Fantastic. And I guess in Europe, anyway, we have a temptation or a tendency to think of California and America in general as a newcomer to the world of wine. But there is obviously a long and compelling history and some really compelling stories there as well, some compelling personal stories, I imagine.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it is a comparatively shorter history, but it's still a history that deserves to be explored.
That was The Wines of California by Elaine Brown. But let's go on to book number 3.
So book number 3 is Taste the Limestone, Smell the Slate by Alex Maltmans. So a geologist wanders through the world of wine. So very much kind of on that theme of a scientific approach. It is all about world of geology, which is as I wrote when I reviewed it, is something that has always slightly daunted me.
Yes.
And I think Alex Maltmans does a really good job of stripping the topic back and making it very readable to even a geological dunce like myself. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's a sort of broken into, it's really a collection of essays rather than a book that's written from scratch. And lots of it was already published in the world of fine wine. But it's sort of all been brought together under one book by Académie du Vin Library.
Yeah, and like the book by Sonny Hodge, this is one that attempts in some way to debunk some of the myths about wine, about minerality.
Yeah, exactly, and it's very much sort of taking the pseudoscience that I think even some, I don't know if some of the winemakers or wine producers, they don't necessarily believe it, but they certainly talk about it as if it's part of their messaging, and it's become something that gets thrown around very casually, entirely unjustifiably a lot of the time. So I think it's it's really great to see someone taking issue with it and writing from a point of real knowledge, and using the science to explain what the link really is, if any,
Yes.
to what we're tasting and the way wines are grown and made.
Yeah. How successful is Alex Mogman, Emeritus Professor in Geology? How successful was he in making that topic digestible, readable, enjoyable to read? Or is this something that your kind of average reader is going to struggle with?
No, I think that's what makes it, that's partly why I picked it and enjoyed it, is that I don't think anyone's going to make reading about rocks ever quite like reading a novel. So I won't tell you that it's a page turner. That's certainly not what you should be expecting. But it's very accessible, and he'll tell you exactly what he's going to talk about. Then he talks about it, and then at the end he may tell you what he's told you about. But he does it very well and very clearly, and brings sort of lighter context to what could be a very, very dense book. And the way it's broken down, I think, is very digestible. Yeah. So, each of the sort of chapters and their individual essays looks at anything from, a particular region to a particular type of rock to something maybe broader. So yeah, I think it's done very well. It's certainly the best book on geology and wine that I've read. I can't say that there are lots of them. There is another one by him.
It's not a crowded field, is it?
No, but yeah, I'm glad that Alex Maltman is in it. That's for sure.
And I mean, I'm also a big fan of these kind of compendiums. If you have a body of work, then I'm a big fan of putting that together in one place. Also, because as standalone articles in this era of limited concentration spans, shorter standalone articles are a good way forward, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And it also lends itself, because of that format, to sort of dipping in and reading, one section and drifting away. You don't need to sit down and read it cover to cover, which again is something that I think not many people want to do when it comes to geology.
Okay, and do you want to give us a reading from Taste the Limestone, just to give us a flavour of that book, Sophie?
Yeah, we'll do. I would say it was hard to take a small portion of this book out of context, so I have had to go for sort of an introductory bit to make it not sound too bizarre on its own.
Okay.
So this is from the start of the chapter called Musings on Minerals and Metaphors. It used to be simple. The word mineral was either a noun referring to things found in the ground or an adjective for something to do with the ground. It wasn't an alluring word. For geology graduates, I remember, the minerals industry was a major employer, but I don't think that working with coal, iron ore and the like was ever seen as remotely glamorous. In the last 2 or 3 decades, however, things have changed. Mining is directed at exotic-sounding materials used in fancy technologies, and elsewhere the world has taken on a range of new senses, some of which involve desirability and even charisma. Unfortunately, the new meanings are frequently blurred, and mineral has become a confusing word. And nowhere is this more the case than in the world of wine.
Okay, yes, very good. That gives us a real sense of how he's approaching this issue and the vexed question of minerality and wine, which I know a few authors are currently trying to tackle.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's go on to book number 4.
So their book number 4 is Drinking the World, a wine odyssey, which is sort of one of the more an introductory style book by Bert Blaize and Victoria Brzezinski. I'm not 100% sure if I'm saying her name correctly, I should say. And it's an introductory book in some ways, in that it's targeted at someone who's interested in wine. But Blaize is a very good sommelier if he's not someone you're familiar with. They wrote a book together that I think was about pairing wine and food. So there's sort of a duo that has worked together before, but it tackles a sort of the world of wine in quite a fun way, as you might guess from the name. So it really sort of, it's broken down into region, but it's not necessarily the regions you expect. So Bordeaux doesn't feature once, but you will find a section on Poland, on Luxembourg, Belgium. So it's quite unusual in that regard. And it's sort of almost, for me, it acts as a sort of an amuse-bouche or an aperitif. It's something that sort of makes you eager for more and to sort of dive into the world of wine. It's something to dip in and out of. Within each of those regions that it tackles, it then has a profile of a particular producer and then has a sort of handy little Q&A section with each of those winemakers that really is the sort of a perfect little travel hit list if you were going to any of the mentioned regions, because it includes things like a local wine bar or restaurant, something, a tip for if you're visiting, and dishes to look out for.
Yeah, again, it's not one that I've read, but it does sound very interesting, particularly this idea of taking the reader off the beaten track, and that blend of food and drink and travel writing. But yeah, it sounds fascinating.
Yeah,
You mentioned
exactly.
Poland, but
It's something that you can really see having legitimately broad appeal, which is one of the reasons I think it's so exciting. It's not a wine book that I fear will be sold briefly in wine shops on release and then never seen again. It's definitely a book that, well, I hope has ended up on lots of bookshops and will appeal to quite a range of consumers.
Yeah, and quite a striking cover as well.
Yeah, exactly, and it is beautifully designed, which again only helps it. It's something that not many wine books do well, I have to say. But again, it's an expensive thing to do well, and here it's got lovely illustrations, maps, sort of brightly coloured and broken down very well. It's also edited very well, so I found very few mistakes, which also endears it to me.
Okay, that's Drinking the World by Victoria Brzezinski and Bert Blaize, a wine odyssey. Do you want to give us a reading, Sophie, from that book?
Yeah, of course. So I've gone for a passage that's on an Italian wine producer, as it felt appropriate, and it's on Lalu from the Langhe.
Okay.
After a year tending to Tredeberry's 5 hectares of 12 acres, the duo was fully enamoured by the Langhe. Nicola Alberto's father offered the pair a 0.5 hectare plot in Roncaglie, one of the best crus in the whole of Barbaresco, which they promptly bought aged just 24 with their combined inheritance. It's notoriously difficult to buy land in Piedmont, and so Tredeberry's offer to sell to them is a real validation of their dedication and talent. Owning such a killer plot was a huge moment for the pair. They had their foot in the door to make them a legit Barbaresco producer. After planting vines on their new plot in 2014, the following 4 formative years were spent working in Langhe and across Europe, including 2 Burgundy winemakers with a cult following in the trade, with Cécile Tremblay and with Dominique Lefont at Domaine des Comtes Lefont. A lot of our inspiration comes from the harvest we did in Burgundy. The way they respect the fruit and terroir is unique, says Lara.
Excellent. And we get a good sense of the style there from that short passage.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it was the use of the word legit, which I don't think I've heard before in a
Yeah.
traditional wine book. So yeah, that sounds like a really interesting book, really stimulating book, and one that perhaps will attract a younger audience.
Yeah, definitely. Without dumbing it down, that's for sure, which is nice.
Sure, yeah. Book number 5, Sophie. What's your 5th choice for 2025?
So it is one you've actually mentioned. It's Sunny Hodges' book, The Cynic's Guide to Wine.
He'll be delighted to be included in our list for 2025.
Yeah, I think he will. I think he was so delighted when I featured the book. He messaged me. I don't know why he's so underconfident, because it's a fantastic book, and one that more than deserves a profile. But yeah, he's. It sounds like you've had him on the show.
Yes, he was a guest a few months ago. So yeah, fantastic guest. Really, I think, as I said at the time, effortlessly charming.
Yeah, and he's a brilliant sommelier and host, and I think all of that really comes across in this book, which is, I think I said the same thing when I wrote about it. I don't know quite what I was expecting when I opened it, but it wasn't what I found, but that's in a very good way. I just think it is a really interesting and engaging approach. It's scientific, but not too whiny and scientific, if that makes sense. He sort of brings science from other areas, and it's so meticulously researched by the looks of things. There's a huge bibliography section that is fantastic. I'd quite like to go away and read all of it, but I don't think I've got time. I think he again does a great job of a little bit like Alex Maltman, stripping away the mystique. It's another one of the scientific releases that we've seen this year that really sort of grounds wine in a new way, I think.
Yes, absolutely, and he's as I said to him at the time, he's a cynic by nature, but in a positive sense. If he can be a positive cynic, he likes to get to the bottom of things, to understand things, to ask why. He's the annoying child who always asks why. He wasn't content just to accept the perceived wisdom.
Yeah.
And he debunks a number of myths, if you like, about wine and the wine industry, not least this question of minerality.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a whole chapter dedicated to debunking terroir, and I think it's all done really well. I think I've got slight niggles, like I do with almost every book I look at, but
you're hard to please.
But it's a really good book, and particularly for someone who hadn't written one before.
Yeah, absolutely. I would fully endorse that. Do you want to give us a reading from The Cynic's Guide to Wine by Sunny Hodge?
It's a little passage from a section that's on the language of wine. Describing in words the wine we drink is so often the hardest part of a tasting experience. We possess the words, we taste the wine, yet making connections between the words and what we drink is a real challenge for all but the most seasoned of wine drinkers. Scent boxes are used in sommelier training to develop these neurological connections and do assist us in learning how to communicate an olfactory input. Neurological research on this issue of describing flavours relates it to the distance between the areas of our brain responsible for the cortical processing of language, Wernicke's and Broca's areas, and the olfactory system that's situated at the front of our brain. In brain measurement terms, they're pretty far apart. The physical distance between parts of the brain seems like an archaic way to look at these interactions. However, correlations have been formed between the general intelligence of animals and their information processing capacity, IPC. IPC depends on the quantity of cortical neurons, interneuronal distance, and axonal conduction velocity. Studies in schizophrenia have demonstrated that brain connectivity strength lessens as the distance between parts of the brain increase. It appears that our brains are hardwired to be rubbish at explaining flavours in wine.
Excellent. And that again gives you a sense of the intellectual depth, if you like, of that book, or the scientific depth of that book. But also it's not completely inaccessible. It's
exactly.
it's extremely well written and approachable.
Yeah, entirely.
Okay, that was book number 5 of your favourite books of the year. We'll put details of all those books on the show notes, and also they'll be posted around various social media sites. So looking forward now, Sophie, are there any books or writers that you're looking forward to seeing in 2026?
Yeah, I have to say, I don't know what's coming in 2026. There's always a little lull in publishing post everything that's sort of come up for Christmas release, and then things quieten down for a bit. So there isn't much that's landing on my desk yet. I know that there will be at some point another in the series from Marc Bouffard, so I'm very much looking forward to that. But otherwise, who knows what's coming? But hopefully something good.
Watch the space.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And what about your own aspirations? I know you're busy with life and work and Master of Wine, but do you have aspirations of your own to write a book? And if so, what would that
be? Maybe one day, but not in the immediate future, that's for sure.
Okay. And what about reading for pleasure? What are you looking forward to reading over the holidays?
So I've got a bit of catching up to do outside of sort of the books I read, the wine books. I set myself a sort of challenge this year to make sure I read enough sort of non-wine books, really. So I'm committed to doing sort of one a week over the year. And although I sort of fell behind, caught up on holiday, and now I've fallen behind again. So I've got to squeeze in 8 before the end of the year, which is doable, but it does mean I need to make sure I get my time on the sofa reading in, or a lot of time on public transport. But so I plan on reading a mix of things. Some of them may be quite short to make sure I hit that target. But one of the things I think over Christmas, I'm going to reread Jane Eyre. It's my favourite book, and I haven't had the chance to reread it for a while. So I'm looking forward to going back to that, which is something I think revisiting a book feels like a horrible, well, not a horrible indulgence, but it feels like an indulgence sometimes, because there's so much great new literature coming out. But yeah, when you love something, I think it's a treat to go back to it.
Yes, absolutely. I'm a big fan of revisiting my favourites, but I know what you mean about sometimes that seeming like a bit of a waste of time when there's so much else. No, I'm a big fan of returning to the tried and the tested, and I guess no more so than a classic like Jane Eyre. One book I've got my eye on over the holidays is nothing too demanding, certainly not as demanding as Jane Eyre, but it's the comic book History of the Cocktail by David Wondrich. And I'm thinking I might buy this as no spoilers, but I might buy this as a Christmas present for my wife who loves cocktails. Then I can have a sneaky read of it over the Christmas holidays. But it looks beautifully written, and it goes into a lot of the history, and beautifully drawn, I should say, but beautifully illustrated because it's a comic book. But it goes into a lot of the history, 5 centuries of mixing drinks and drinking cocktails. So yeah, that's one that I'm hoping to dip into over the Christmas holidays.
It looks fantastic. I'll have to add it to my list for some point. Report back.
Okay. I mean, I'm finding I don't know about you, but there's a lot of fantastic writing, even just blogging at the moment about cocktails, but also about beer. And I do wonder if wine in some senses is falling behind a little bit in terms of maybe it's just the time of year, but I'm really enjoying some of the beer writers and also the cocktail writers who are churning stuff out at the moment.
Yeah, there's a guy called Will Hawkes who writes about beer, who I met him socially before I ever read anything by him, and I love when I find it hard to make the time to read his work, but whenever I do, I'm always wowed by it. And he does, I think he did a big project that was sort of came to fruition this year, which was on sort of top 500 pubs. And I guess there's an accessibility about something like that wine sort of doesn't necessarily have.
Yeah. I mean, the whole concept of pub culture as well is one that I really miss, particularly at this time of year. Italy, of course, has its attractions and its cafe lifestyle and its wine bars and its bistros and its trattoria, but just a good old-fashioned English or Scottish or Irish pub is something, especially at this time of year, that I'm really drawn to. And there are some amazing writers who are telling the stories of the either cask ales or these, traditional pubs in far-flung parts of England or London or elsewhere in the UK. Anyway, that's a little diversion. To return to the topic of wine just before we close, what will be on your table on Christmas Day?
So I haven't decided 100% on everything, but because I haven't yet planned what I'm eating. But I do know I am going to have the first bottle of a case of Burgundy that I bought. It's a 94 Savigny Les Bonnes de Lavière from Robert Ampo, which I'm really excited to crack into. I tasted it when the Fine and Rare bought it when we were looking at the wines a couple of years ago. And it's finally arrived in my cellar and now in my flat, my physical flat. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Not a famous vintage, but this wine is still drinking beautifully.
Okay, sounds good. And again, we'll put a link to that on the show notes. Finally, where can our listeners follow you and where can we follow your writing?
Yeah, so Instagram is probably the best place to see everything I'm doing, although I should warn you that you'd also come across quite a lot of reviews of baked goods. So not necessarily for everyone. But yeah, for everything wine focused and all my writing, firstpress.uk is my site, is definitely the best place. And you can subscribe too.
Excellent. Sophie, thank you very much for being my guest today on Book Club, and thanks for your selection of 5 wonderful wine books, ideal Christmas presents if you haven't already done your Christmas shopping. And to our listeners, thanks very much for your company today. We'll see you in 2026.
Ciao, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Sophie.
Thanks for joining us on Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. Tune in again next month when we'll get between the vines with another great wine book. Remember, our show notes, including full details of all the books we've discussed today, are available at italianwinepodcast.com or wherever you get them.